In a way.
Oh, thank you. You don't like it?
Stop touching your face. Andy, we're live.
We're live, Bambos.
I thought it was Friday today, but it's
I know. I thought it was
Thursday.
Friday. In fact, I didn't even know we were on at 12 today. It was 11:30. I was downstairs thinking, oh, yeah, it's nice. And then I got that scary moment like, oh, we've got a show in 30 minutes. I got to go. I didn't have a background image, so I quickly went to...
And I realized, like, we don't really go live at 12, so...
No. We used to. Remember when we started? We said 12, but then we thought there's all these people from the U.S. that we miss out on if we start early here.
So I don't know if anyone's going to watch this. Oh, we have 2 viewers.
We'll see.
Let's see if we can make it 5.
But you know what? The thing is that
today we have Marcel Heijnen.
We have Marcel Heijnen. And Marcel Heijnen is someone I met some months ago. And as you know, I love to meet people I enjoy. And then I find a topic that we can make it work. He's in China. Oh, he's in Hong Kong. Sorry. My bad. We're going to talk about that. He's in Hong Kong. He's lived there for, I believe, 28 years. He left the Netherlands. We're going to discuss that journey. He's an artist, also well-known, and a designer. There's a lot to discuss, and we're going to do that on. A wonderful chaos.
I really love our intros.
Yeah, they're the best. People might think that we actually think about our plan or what we're going to sing or do right before we begin, but there really is no plan. In fact, I think the best thing is who's going to surprise who with what or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how are you today? This is your second day of eating, right?
What do you mean? No, I've been eating for quite a few days now. You mean after the juicing?
Yeah.
No, juicing ended on Friday last week.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I did a 5-day juice fast. Oh, okay. Yeah. I called it a week, maybe. That's why it got confusing. I'm good. I've jogged 3 out of 4 days, which is really a big thing for me. With me, I always go through these processes where I'll do a lot of self-care, a lot of discipline, and then I'm going to use that as the start for the next sort of more disciplined life. And then I'm disciplined for maybe another 3 days, and then I start breaking it, and then I start suffering the consequences. So that's a pattern that I've seen repeat, and it's okay. I'm jogging still, which is good.
Let's see how long that's going to last.
And you, what's going on your side of the sky that we're in front of right now?
I actually slept in, Andy, today. This was a sleep-in day.
Wow. What is sleep-in? Sleeping for you is you waking up at 6 o'clock. Like, people don't understand that you wake up at 4 a.m. So sleeping in for you, like, how late is that?
Well, this morning I actually stayed in bed till 8.
Oh my God.
Because we had the authentic relating last night. It was quite late when I got home.
That went really well, I saw.
Yeah. And I woke up and I was like, get up. And I was like, oh man, like any other day. But today it's like pushing it. I just felt that I'm going to break today.
And you woke up at 8 o'clock.
I was already breaking a few days ago. So today was like, okay.
When's the last time you stayed in bed till 8 o'clock? Like how long ago? Months?
Months.
It
doesn't happen. Like the latest is 6.
6.
Yeah. For a Thursday morning.
How have you felt? Because you've seen me send you messages at 5:30, 5 a.m. You must be like, what's going on?
Yeah, I'm like, whoa.
I don't know what happened to my sleep schedule, but I'm waking up at 5 a.m. nowadays, just randomly at 5. And I think, okay, I'm getting out of bed. And then I wake up for an hour and then I go back to sleep for maybe another hour after that.
Yeah.
Weird.
Have you been outside though at 5?
No way.
It's really like some mornings you can actually see the stars.
Really?
It makes me feel like I'm back in Cyprus.
Oh.
Like I can see the stars if it's not cloudy.
So it may be worth a jog, you're saying, if I can muscle it.
You come to Wester Park.
Okay. Sweet.
So
Marcel Heijnen.
we have a guy on the other end, and
yes.
Apparently he's in Hong Kong. We're going to be talking to him, and we're going to figure out how the hell does he end up there.
Yeah.
And apparently he loves it there, and he has a completely different twist of being there as opposed to what the westernized world says that country represents.
Yep.
That would be one of the things, right?
Obviously. I love the fascination of lives that are so different than that of my own. And then how is it that they have created a normalcy, which is so different than my normalcy, and yet it works?
I mean, Marcel Heijnen is so weird because his apartment in Hong Kong is almost the same design as the one he has here in the Netherlands.
Yes.
So
which is already a fascinating design in any place. So to have two places that are the same is already wild. So
shall we bring him on?
We bring him on. So
don't go away.
Yeah. Bambos learned a new catchphrase today. Don't go away. Hey.
Hey.
You turned the light off your face since we left you.
No, it's getting dark here.
Oh, is it?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So you were using natural light?
You were using natural light?
Yeah, well, I've got some lights on the table, but it's earlier on you were seeing the natural light coming from the window. I can open the shutters a bit more.
No, it's fine. For our viewers to know, this you're not standing in front of a green screen. This is
this is my studio.
You can see the cat on the back right.
Yes.
Yeah, they're live.
Clawing away at the couch.
One of the most fascinating things you told me is that where you are right now, there are forklifts that also are driving over your head. So you're in an industrial building.
At 5:30 in the morning, I have forklifts going up the floor above me.
I mean,
but it doesn't last very long. It's a good natural wake up.
Yeah, but to think to yourself that you're in an industrialized building where there'd even be a forklift above your head is just.
I have to when I come down the elevator and go onto the street, I have to really watch out to maneuver in between all the forklifts because that's where it's busiest.
And what kind of industrial stuff is going on in the building you're in?
I think traditionally it was a lot of textile.
Okay.
And at the moment, because it's halfway between the city and the airport, and actually I'm looking right at the Hong Kong port with all the cranes and everything.
Oh,
there's
yeah.
There's a lot of logistics here. And I often see these huge crates from airlines, with Virgin Atlantic or Singapore Airlines or Cathay Pacific on it, and that gets opened and I think gets sorted here to be sent on. So there's a lot of postal logistics kind of things at the ground floor. The rest of the building is a bit of everything. Next to me is a little factory of like buttons and labels for the fashion industry.
Oh yeah,
but very traditional. So it's for Hong Kong standard a very old building. It's from the 1980s. It's kind of rough and dirty. It's kind of it looks like weathered on the outside, but it's a great location.
By the way, I must admit, I'm almost not as interested in anything you're saying at the moment because your cat is so incredibly fascinating. Like that cat is drawing all of my attention. Like that cat has so much. That cat has so much energy.
I know. Yeah.
How do you manage that?
How do you put up with it?
Yeah, I mean, like. Who is that, by the way? Is that a boy or girl behind you?
That's a girl. Her name is Rizzo. She's about 7-8 months old. So she's.
You really want to talk about
I do.
50 minutes.
I don't care. I'm a cat lover.
Yeah.
And this is the most important thing, Bambos. You didn't know. This is a segue.
Aha.
Ask him, Bambos.
Into this book.
You said first kiss and then
no. So let's act like we don't know anything about him, Marcel. So Marcel,
tell me,
how the hell did you end up there?
You're going there first. Great.
Like you're living in this beautiful country. There's green, and now you're kind of looking at this industrial area.
Nice.
You mean, which country is green? You mean?
I know. What country are you talking about, Bambos?
You're talking about Holland?
I love Amsterdam. Like I'm crazy about it.
I love Amsterdam too. But I tell you, Hong Kong is more green than Amsterdam.
Yeah.
So
that's the amazing thing. Whenever you see photos of Hong Kong or the stuff you chose as your background, kind of densely populated concrete towers, there's a lot of that, but that's very concentrated. I think Hong Kong is about 10 to 15% built up, and the rest is kind of nature. You can go to secluded beaches here. I hike almost every day. If I walk for 10 minutes, I'm in the hills. And then I can walk for 2 or 3 hours in the hills, and I would meet snakes and wild boar, and it's fantastic.
Wow.
And that's I think almost everywhere in the city. I'm no longer in the city center, but I used to live in the city center. And even there, for 15 minutes, I could walk and I'd be up on the hill, walking to the Victoria Peak with amazing views of the city, but in green areas with
I'd like to
waterfalls and stuff
rephrase
like
my
that.
question then.
Yeah.
What prompted you to get on a plane and go and live there?
Actually, to correct your intro a little bit, like I've been away indeed to Asia for 28 years, coming to 29, but most of that was in Singapore.
Oh,
So, and I've done Singapore twice, and I've done Hong Kong twice. So this is my second stint in Hong Kong. Initially, I left in 1992 when I was a graphic designer for Philips. I was in the
Okay.
design arm for Philips, an in-house designer in Eindhoven, and where I grew up. And then I'm actually a little bit further, backtrack the story a little bit more. My parents lived in Taiwan for a couple of years in the late 80s. And then I didn't join them because I was already working, but I visited them and I was totally fascinated by it. And I did, during that first trip, it was Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Bali. And I mean, in those days, Bali was still like an adventure to go to.
yeah.
And then I came back to the Netherlands and I was like, yeah, I want that too, you know. So I've always had that fascination with Asia. And in 1992, the company asked me to move to Singapore and to lead a small team of graphic designers, local graphic designers in Singapore. So I did that for 3 years. Then after 3 years, they asked me to do the same in Hong Kong with a slightly larger team, which I did. I didn't love it at the time, but I liked Singapore a little bit better. But I did it anyway, and I still had a very good time here. So I lived here for 3 years in the mid-90s, which was actually the time when Hong Kong was given back to China. So the famous 1997. So I lived here kind of the time leading up to that, and the actual date, and you know the events that were going around, and talking to a lot of locals about how they feel about it and everything. So that beginning of belonging to China and starting the 50-year period under the one country, two systems kind of umbrella in a way. And then I moved back to Singapore late 1997 and started my own business in graphic design. But I came back here 5 years ago.
I mean, I've always found Singapore very sterile. So I don't know if it's like the Switzerland of Asia for me.
Yeah, I think it isn't as sterile as a lot of people think when they visit. You can find. I mean, I lived in a beautiful 1930s pre-war house. There's actually a lot of heritage there. There is also, if you want to find it, there's enough dirt there as well. Yeah. But I wouldn't say sterile, but I would say maybe kind of manicured, or like it's quite well developed. And that I guess in hindsight was what prompted me eventually to leave again, because I made a transition from graphic design, first for a company and then on my own with a bunch of people in a kind of an agency collective setting, to taking a sabbatical more than 10 years ago, and then switching to photography and art photography, where in the beginning I really concentrated on decay and kind of messiness and urban, kind of textures and things like that. And that I find a lot more in Hong Kong. Yeah. So I guess that made me fall in love with Hong Kong all over again. And that's the big difference between Singapore and Hong Kong. I mean, there's many differences, but one of them, visually, Hong Kong is like New York. It's got, it's raw, it's real, it's authentic. And Singapore is a little bit too organized and controlled, and manicured, too neat somehow. So you don't find. A lot of the stuff that I photograph, the series that I do these days, and the reason that works is really kind of mostly thanks to Hong Kong. It's just visually a beautiful city.
Yeah, I've always been, when I walk in Hong Kong, so stimulated. Like it always is interesting when I look at how many pictures I take of a place. It is indicative of how much I enjoyed that stay.
Oh yeah.
And I'll normally shoot somewhere between 100 and say 300 or 400 pictures on a day, and the 100 would be like, okay, because I'll shoot without, like, if I'm walking past the scene, I'll shoot and just keep going. And then at the end, like the joy I get is when I'm going to the toilet, then I take my phone out and I say, which of those 25 pictures did I enjoy? You know?
I love the details. I can see you on the toilet now, pants down to the knees, holding your phone.
So that kind of thing. And when I was in Hong Kong, I shot a lot.
Yeah.
So that's what I felt like. It was like there was.
You visited a few times, or?
I visited 3 times now.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
I was there in 1994, I believe, when it would lead up to the one country, two systems.
Yeah,
and it was really fascinating to be there. Of course, at a moment when there was a lot of insecurity, and it's kind of amazing that you have been living there through that as a Westerner, because on one level, on our side, and this is what fascinated me having you on as part of our show, is that we get such a view of Hong Kong and China, and it comes so tainted with all the ideas that the Western media brings. That when I spoke to you and you're like, hey, Andy, we're in Hong Kong, and yeah, we're supposed to be one system in a few years. So yeah, the fact that they're cracking down now is no big deal. You know, like more or less, not black or. It was more like, Andy, contextually understand there's more going on than what the Western media may be portraying. That I found really fascinating. Yeah. And I mean, the fact that you're there knowing that if you live long enough, you will be living in China.
Yeah, well, in a way, that's kind of already started, of course. Like, I mean, the 50-year period is now kind of, I mean, it's almost like expedited that China gets some control, which we all know, which happened this year and kind of due to all the demonstrations last year. But yeah, it is interesting because in 1997, nobody knew really what China was going to do.
Yeah,
it was, and I remember the images and also the discussion. And again, I think at the same time, I was already annoyed with the Western media because they always, I mean, a lot of these things are true all at the same time. The thing is, like, whenever I talk to anyone local or foreign, but mostly locals, that they have I think more of a feel of things, you can get vastly different kind of perspectives on these things. And so I wouldn't say it's that way, and the Western media portrays it this way, but the Western media really filters out what, confirmation bias, what they want to kind of portray about China. And in those days, it was quite dark. And some of the colleagues I was working with, I mean, some of them were worried about it. Other ones were like, well, I'm Chinese, and now we're going to belong to China again. Not that they hate. I mean, that's an interesting thing with Hong Kong. It was a colony for a long time. Yeah. And sometimes people forget that as well, right? It was a Western colony, which is very outdated. Most colonizers gave up the colonies just after the Second World War, like Holland did with Indonesia, and Britain did with India, but they held on to Hong Kong. And in most colonies, the people that are colonized are kind of quite happy when the colonizers leave, right? But in Hong Kong, that has a different side to it, because I think a lot of people are kind of happier under the Brits.
Yeah.
What we were just talking about. No, so already I felt at that time there was this divide of people that were in favor of it, people that have actually left the country. That happened a lot before 1997. Any Hong Konger with the means to leave and to live somewhere else had already left. So I think Deng Xiaoping and Margaret Thatcher, they agreed on the 1997 handover in 1984.
Yeah.
So in the late 80s, a lot of Hong Kongers started leaving. A lot of them, I mean, Vancouver is nicknamed Hongcouver after that, because a lot of them went to Vancouver, some to Australia, to Singapore, to the US, but a lot of them to Canada. That's a typical thing. And I mean, those people started there, got their passports, or sometimes even just their kids and their wives were there, and they would continue living and working in Hong Kong.
Okay.
And it would give them their kind of backup. But a lot of those people came back, or their children came back in the last, I mean, after 1997 actually happened, and actually China left it largely alone.
Yeah, because they saw that it wasn't as bad as what they had expected. I'm guessing.
No, I mean, when there's uncertainty, you can paint all kinds of scenarios, and most people somehow didn't trust China with leaving Hong Kong alone, but they kind of largely did. And Hong Kong actually thrived in those years, in those
Wow.
early years, because China, of course, is growing huge in the meantime, and Hong Kong has been the gatekeeper, and they have a lot of profit from being at the doorstep of China.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it was actually it was probably a lot more money to be made here than in
Yeah.
Vancouver,
Yeah, well, there was a lot of what you could see is a lot of conferences were going on in Hong Kong. So they were bringing people over. It was sort of a very safe step into China.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, how do you foresee your life changing then in the next few years? Will it change?
I have no idea. At the moment, I mean, yeah. So the protest happened last year, which was quite dramatic, and as a result, I don't know how much you know about this. China has imposed, bless you, gezondheid.
Sorry about that, Bambos.
It's okay.
I just infected Bambos.
Yeah.
I'm already infected.
So now we have a national security law in Hong Kong imposed by mainland China, and that's what's the main discussion at the moment and the main fear, and that has been pushed through on the 30th of June, just the day before the anniversary of the handover, which is the first of July. And a lot of people are nervous about that. People have already been arrested under that law. A lot of people feel that the freedom is tarnished. It all depends on how it's going to be implemented. And it's very interesting because by itself, I mean, the law gets presented again by the Western media as this horrible thing that China has pushed through and everything. But then, most countries have a national security law. The US has one, and is actually quite a lot more stringent, and you can get a lot more penalized than you get in China. The only thing is, like, if you get arrested here for something that China doesn't like you doing, you don't know what kind of legal system you're going to get into.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of fears. I mean, I'm in a circle of creatives and journalists and people that are in that area, the media. Those people are quite worried, and also, I mean, Hong Kong has been this China left Hong Kong alone in terms of, I mean, that was the agreement. Just to recap on that, like, Hong Kong would be autonomous for 50 years after 1997. And autonomous means separate legal system, complete freedom of press, complete freedom of opinion and expression and speech. And, well, the protest last year, I mean, people had a very high degree of freedom, but China started meddling with the political system here and the democracy, which democracy is kind of a new thing here because it wasn't democratic under the British either. So for those 50 years, Hong Kong was supposed to be democratic and running their own thing. And that, I think the frustration of the Hong Kongers was that there was never a government that really represented them. And then, I mean, again, to recap, about a year ago, Carrie Lam, the current leader, tried to push through a law that would, as a result of that law, it wasn't made for that, but as a result of that law, people could be extradited from Hong Kong to China. And that really just threw everyone off. And then we had demonstrations with 2 million people on the streets at one point, mostly peaceful. I mean, there's 7 million people here, so 2 million people on the street is quite a big deal. But then it turned into violence, and both sides quite kind of violent police.
How was it for you? How was it for you during that time? Did you live differently? Were your friends involved in these protests? Like, how did it impact you directly?
A lot of my friends were supporting especially the peaceful side of it, and were involved in some of these bigger marches and things like that. It wasn't. That's the thing. Hong Kong never feels really dangerous, and if the same kind of violent oppositions or like clashes would have happened in some other countries, I mean, you see that now in the US where people do have guns, and then again it escalates. Actually, nobody really has died. I mean, there's rumors that some people have died in some instances, but it was violent, and it was it was a bit scary, like getting the news and getting your Facebook feed and all of that stuff. But on a day-to-day basis, you kind of knew where to go and where not to go. And there was even, for a while, there was a pattern in it. Like, it was only on the weekends. And it was only there and there and there, and then it was almost like, and on Monday morning everyone would go back to normal, and we would have a whole week, and then on Friday the tension was coming again, and then people go, oh, it's in Mongkok now, it's over there now. It's like, and then at one point the worst bit was when the kind of the radical protesters kind of probably figured out that doesn't work, because, and I mean the whole thing, that people wanted to kind of paralyze the economic system a little bit. So they weren't out to kind of kill each other, but they want to hit the government where it hurts. So they kind of went like, well, maybe the weekends aren't good. So they started doing this during the week. They started blocking the traffic tunnels. They started blocking the main roads in Central. And then there was a period where, if you wanted to stay away from it, there was a lot of places you couldn't go to. But you could still go for a hike and things like that. But there was a period where it was pretty grim. I
remember I was working with, and next week I actually have a presentation with the Polytechnic University in Hong Kong.
Oh yeah. That was the crescendo of the protest. Actually, it was a turning point, I think.
I actually learned that only after the fact, that my the professor that brings me in there, Gino, is the one who often brings guests on the show.
Okay.
He basically was like, "Yeah, Andy, I don't know about that thing we planned the other day." I was like, "What?" I don't know if you're watching the news, Andy, but there's some stuff going on this side that may stop that from happening.
Yeah, that was an interesting couple of weeks where a lot of protesters kind of holed up inside the Polytechnic, and that the building, it's interesting that it's a number of buildings. It's very central in the city, and there's only a few places where you can go in and out.
Yeah,
that I mean, and that was the time where I think some good decisions were made, when not everyone would agree with me, but the fear was like, we're going to have another Tiananmen Square here, because there were a few hundred, I think there were 1,000 protesters, and they were all kind of the radicals. And my cat is acting up here.
Yeah, you can bring the cat on. We love animals. At least I do. Bambos doesn't. It's okay. I don't really care about Bambos.
My audio feed. No, that was. So they had 1,000 people or something holed up in there, kind of creating it as a fortress, and then the police were all outside, and the tensions were very high, and the fear was they're going to go inside, and then people will get killed. But I think they realized like that's not a good idea. So it was a lot of waiting out, and people would come out. Some people escaped with very dramatic James Bond type of on
ropes and
lines and stuff
nice.
Like yeah. Wow. And they had motorcycles down there waiting for them, and then kind of here, and it was very exciting. But I think once that was over, that kind of was the turning point. And then the virus came. That took a lot of energy out of the whole thing as well.
Yeah. I think the virus, to some degree, I was telling Andy, probably saved us a lot of wars.
Yeah,
especially from the US side.
Well, I had this discussion with a good friend of mine here the other day. It's like, what happened to terrorism?
Yeah, exactly. Or
it's like they all took a break,
The deaths in some countries have decreased because they actually have less flu.
Hong Kong actually does really well with the pandemic. We have 5,000 cases here, which is about the same as you guys in the Netherlands have in 2 days. Now we have 5,000 cases in total in 9 months, and we have about 100 deaths. And I looked it up the other day, and normally we have 300 deaths due to flu every year. And so I think this year that will be less too, because everyone's wearing these masks. So I think they're in a net kind of balance. But the terrorists, they don't need to do anything right now.
Now, Bambos, what do you
see America collapse?
Yeah, exactly. Why would they do anything? America's doing it for them.
Exactly.
I've got some other questions that lead in the direction you won't like. So do I get to go that direction, or do you have to?
Well, actually, I've always been Put your hand down. I've always been fascinated by living in the West, and it's very easy to point the finger down south or down east,
Yeah.
and everyone's head turns that way, and like, oh, that's horrible, and then everyone makes these viral videos, and they don't, we here in the West, we don't see that shit's happening all the time, but it's just on a very like undercurrent. There it might be in your face, but here's very undercurrent, but it's still happening.
What kind of things are you talking about?
Let's just take the idea of control. Like we talk about, like when I think of mainland China, I saw a lot of media at some point about microchipping. It's also happening here, but it hasn't been implemented, but it is happening. And I have no idea.
I don't know about microchipping, but of course the surveillance is at a very high level in China.
It's getting on here. Elansgracht has a few cameras now, and that street never had cameras.
Oh yeah, there'll be certainly far more surveillance going on for sure.
But yeah, I guess in the West we're all being the surveillance is done by Google and Facebook, right? So
Yeah.
the choice whether you want to be watched
Exactly.
by the corporation or by the government.
Very well put.
Yeah, I think that there's interesting ways of looking at that. I mean, in no way I would condone some of the things that we know about China in terms of human rights and what's going on in Xinjiang and Tibet to a certain extent, and also here. But I realized the other day, it's like the thing with the surveillance or the happiness of their citizens in China is actually, I would think 90% is fine with their government. And that's probably not an overstatement. There's a lot of people who are who have kind of had the taste of the West and have studied abroad or are living abroad, and they feel that they can justify the way China is being run.
Yeah.
But if you leave alone for a second that how it's being controlled, and of course people get one narrative because a lot of Western media is being kept out. But there's also an interesting point you can make on that. But if you just look at, there's a lot of control for sure, but the wealth and the money and everything else, where does it end up? And if you look at we don't have to be pointing fingers with the US, but a little bit like the US, and to a lesser extent Europe, I think most of it ends up in the hands of a few, and doesn't really trickle down to the rest. And there's a large part of the population that suffers. And I think China it came from that, and has actually been correcting all of that over the last few decades. And now, the government and these party officials, they probably all do well, and some people are incredibly wealthy and everything, but it also comes to the larger population. It translates into infrastructure, and of course also in spending power and all of that stuff. So I think in a way it's a more egalitarian society than
there's more distribution of wealth for sure.
Yes.
You know what I find really fascinating is if you look at there's a lot of talk about the camps that you mentioned. I don't know the name of the location where those prison camps are supposed to be in.
Yeah, with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang.
In Xinjiang.
Xinjiang, in the northwestern area of China.
And what I think is kind of fascinating is that if you look at it from the Western side, you say, wow, look at what they're doing there. And obviously it's terrible, like no discussion. But if you're in the West pointing the finger there and not looking at the prison industrial complex that you've created with more incarcerated people in your country than any other country in the world, and thinking to yourself, is there something that we're not doing in our country right that creates that in some weird way, we're not doing anything different than the other country. We've just created a different idea about why it's not as bad.
I think you've done better PR around it. That's
obviously
the main thing. Yeah, it gets hidden. It's made invisible. But it's very clearly that the war on drugs and the way that's kind of out of balance with more black people in jails than white people.
Yeah,
that's a total system.
Yeah,
and let alone things like Guantanamo Bay or things like that,
yeah.
which are also kind of that's more directly related, because the reason that China does this, their justification for it is that these people are a threat. They are potential terrorists.
Yeah.
And there have been a few instances of terrorism by people from there, and then they go like, but their way of thinking, and in their mind they're completely right about it. Their way of thinking, we're going to re-educate them.
Yeah.
And then we put them in camps, and we're gonna kind of slowly unbrainwash their Muslim identity, and we're gonna make them sing Mandarin songs and learn the language and embrace being Chinese, and forcefully. But for us that's totally wrong.
Yeah.
But I mean, in the end, that's also just cultural.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
if the US feels threatened by another country, it goes into that country and kills 500,000 people and steals the oil, and somehow that's okay.
I wouldn't say threatened. They create the idea that there's a threat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or they enter another country that has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's all of these double standards which are very interesting. The same with, I mean, if you don't even look at those things, but the expansion of China now into the rest of the world with the famous Belt and Road project, the new Silk Road, going into other countries that are poor, where they offer infrastructure in exchange for resources and things like that. And a lot of people in the West like, oh, you can't do that. You just kind of But we've been doing that for centuries in the West. Huh? Sorry?
Yeah, for centuries in the West, we've been doing that, right?
Yeah.
And then we're saying you can't do that, and you can't do that. Right?
I know.
But
I know.
What
I
find
was sitting in
scary.
Amsterdam. Sorry, I was sitting in Amsterdam last year, and it was fascinating. Like, I was with a good friend of mine, and she was kind of, oh, it's so scary. China goes again into Africa, and they get to go for the resources and the materials, and they go there and there. And we were sitting in the Haarlemmerstraat, in front of the old building for the West Indies Company, which is like the headquarters of plundering in the past.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we can easily say that because we've done it 300 years ago up to fairly recently, and because of that we are ahead of, and therefore we've developed into a kind of, now we have the luxury of having this mindset. Now it's like, yeah, this is wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, in the bigger scheme of what people have been around for a few 100,000 years. And if you would just take a little bit of that kind of cultural bias out of it and go like, well, for us it was okay. The Dutch were involved in slave trade. That was
big time.
totally okay at that time. That was the ethical norm at that time.
Yeah.
And that's not that long ago.
No.
So yeah, China is on a certain route, and it might or will come to certain conclusions as well. There might be similar to ours in the sense that there will be more open-minded or there might be more freedom, but they may not.
Yeah.
We don't know that, but it's very hard to go like they don't think the way we think now, but 50 years ago and 100 years ago we thought completely different, and we did all these things. And we don't look at that.
Benefited from that.
And benefited from that, and are ahead because of that.
If you go down Herengracht today, they had a building which they re-established, which has where all the slave trade actually went through. Oh. And it's fascinating because you walk by it, and then there's basically the head of a slave male and a female on either side of the building.
Wow.
And
on the Herengracht.
On the Herengracht.
Where exactly?
I don't know. You walk out the door, turn right or left. Yeah.
Okay.
Fascinating. Yeah. And that's part of the history that obviously they were the ones that were the traders. They're the ones that actually, they got the best bit because they just took the money out and they look clean, as if they didn't do anything in the process. Like making peace with that past is certainly something the Dutch are just coming to grips with now.
Yeah.
No,
another thing that I've been thinking about quite a bit, and I've also been looking at a lot of documentaries and talks about this, is like there are some real cultural differences between the East and the West in terms of thinking. I mean, the most obvious one is that I think in the West right now we are more individualistic in our thinking, and in the East it's a bit more about collective, whatever, collectivity, community. And I think the trap that the Western media or the Western mind falls into is this. I don't know if you can say that in English. In Dutch, we have this saying, like, the innkeeper trusts his guests the way he is.
You trust the person as far as you actually are to be trusted. That's sort of what you're saying.
Something like that, yeah. And we have that as a proverb, like, so if the innkeeper can't be trusted, he will not trust his guests.
Yeah.
I think that's so. And the Western mind and the Western history has been that of colonization and plundering, and and therefore knows, like, well, if you have the opportunity, you will do that. And I think, and then people kind of project that onto China. And of course, China is really large, needs a lot of energy, needs a lot of source materials and things like that, and goes elsewhere for it. But doesn't necessarily mean that they will want to exercise their powers there. That's a Western thing in a way.
Yeah.
There's an interesting guy, a British guy who studied a lot of this stuff, and he pointed out, for example, the same time at the same period as Columbus had his ships, there was a Chinese fleet, and they put the models next to each other. The Columbus ship is about that size, and the Chinese ship is about that size. And there's also, there's theories that China actually discovered America in 1421 or something like that, before Columbus did, and kind of did nothing with it.
That's just propaganda, Marcel. It's propaganda. Really, 1421.
Yeah, there's books written about it. I mean, it's also been kind of, I don't know, debunked. I'm not sure.
Yeah, who knows?
But an interesting thing with that is that, I mean, a lot of the wealth of Amsterdam is related to the technology at that time. In Amsterdam, they were a little bit better with ships that can go a little bit further than the other ones, so they could start trading, and then therefore they had this kind of how do you say that? They were further ahead.
They had an advantage. Yeah, they also figured out how to cure the fish so that they could stay longer at sea and still stay alive, of course.
Okay, those kind of things. Yeah. So it's usually technological advantage that leads to how far you can reach. And the interesting thing is, China had that technological advantage at that time and didn't do that much with it. And that's an interesting thing to consider sometimes, because it's not in that, and we think of China as like, well, they're in that mode and they're going to colonize all of us. And there's a lot of things maybe to be worried about with China's influence in the world right now. But yeah, it doesn't mean that that's to the same extent as the Western mind would do it.
You know, what blows my mind is to know that Chinese is the most spoken language in the world.
Well, 1.4 billion people, right?
I know. Isn't that weird, though? Because
as a first language, I guess.
Yeah. If you go anywhere else, you're always thinking to yourself, oh, English must be. Everywhere they kind of speak English. But no, it's not true. Actually, Chinese is far more spoken.
Yeah. And Spanish probably is a big...
No, actually not. Chinese
not more than English? Okay.
No, maybe more than English, but Chinese is the number one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm going to transition to something totally different, Bambos, but I'm going to let you sort of feel into your space at the moment.
Well, and I love that you let me feel into my space.
Because I'm digging you today. You're really going for it. Bambos always asks the mommy daddy questions, and today you're information questions.
What?
Why don't I ask mommy daddy questions then?
Because the way he talked about his parents, it was more like a inspiring.
Nice. Yeah. Which of your parents do you hate, Marcel? Tell us. And why? What are the worst? What is the worst thing your parents ever did to you?
Mom and dad.
Are they alive? First of all,
Mr. and Mrs. Heijnen.
My dad is not alive anymore. He died about 16, 17 years ago.
Okay.
My mom still is.
So we can trash your dad. What was the worst thing your dad ever did?
Yeah, I don't know.
Andy likes to ride that edge. He's riding that edge.
I'm just looking at his face. Your reaction tells us more than we don't even need to answer any of our questions. It's just looking at the joy. You were saying something that I thought was really interesting. I've heard it said a lot, or in different ways. It's when someone has the privilege to ignore. And I was speaking to a friend of mine who was also on the show, David Boone, he was born in Cleveland, Black. He went from being homeless to going to Harvard. And I was talking to him about the race relations in America and how, a lot of the whites aren't necessarily taking up the resistance, as it were, against whatever the the inequity in America is.
Jane Elliott says that too, right?
And who says that?
Jane Elliott.
Yeah, Jane Elliott, of course, she says that as well. But he says, Andy, that's a privilege because they've already got it. So why would they fight for something that they've already got?
Yeah.
And when
The
he said that,
privilege to stay out of it a little bit.
yeah, the privilege not to have to deal with it because I don't have since I don't have a problem, it isn't a problem. And I found when he said that to me, I found it, first of all, quite beautiful because there wasn't blame in it. It wasn't bad. It was just, of course, they're not worried about it because it's not their problem.
Yeah.
Like their kids aren't getting pulled out of the car and getting shot. So, hey, well, it's not a problem because it's not our problem.
Yeah.
And what I've
I'm a little bit in that situation in Hong Kong, to be honest. And because I mean, I have a lot of discussions with my local friends here, and a lot of the discussion, even with foreign friends, is like, are you going to stay? Are you going to leave? What are you going to do? And I'm in that luxurious position that I can ride it out until it really doesn't work anymore. And then I have a plan B. I have another passport. I have another place to go.
Yeah.
And I find it a fascinating place still. And I mean, things have calmed down a bit, but yeah, I'm a little bit like I'm this outsider living here, but being the perpetual outsider. So yeah, it's a similar position.
You do feel that way because I lived in Japan for 2 years, and I always thought if I stayed here the rest of my life, I'd always be the outsider. So I'd never.
I hear that a lot about Japan. Yeah.
And would that be similar for you?
Yes and no. I think Japan is more of a kind of a monolithic society where, as a foreigner, as a gaijin, you never get into it. I think Hong Kong has a large part of that, but Hong Kong is also much more of an international place. I think the percentage of non-locals here is relatively high compared to Japan on the whole. Maybe in Tokyo is comparable. Even that, I think it's more metropolitan here. And you can easily mix in that segment of the population. If you go into the city, in the trendy bars, the gentrified bits and everything, it's all English, and it might be an Australian or an Indian person helping being your barista or some. So there's that, and you can plug into that, but that's not the real local culture, of course.
Yeah,
the real local culture is then the language barriers there. So it's like I'm an outsider, but I'm kind of comfortable with it in a way. I feel I'm an outsider in Amsterdam too.
Yeah, I think that's. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how it is for you, Bambos. I don't feel home anywhere.
I said it last night.
Yeah,
we did a workshop yesterday where we played a game called If You Really Knew Me. I was raped. I feel alone. So everyone could connect, and even though we found common ground, Nadine actually rightly said, I still feel alone. And I was like, yeah, I do feel alone. It's not the only way I wouldn't feel alone is if I numb it by watching Netflix or other distractions. Yeah. I think the root of being human is also being in touch with that aloneness all the time.
Yeah.
But I mean, what you're saying, Andy, is like you're not at home anywhere.
Yeah.
Anyway. But I do feel at home in my space here. I do feel.
And you're gonna laugh. You're gonna laugh. In now seeing your place online right now and knowing your place in Amsterdam, it's fascinating for me because I'm like, wow, he saw a vision of what home was for him, and he could create that for himself.
Kind of, yeah. That space is very important for me because also, I mean, I've been working from home for the last 21 years or something like that. So I do spend a lot of time in my space, and that's as long as I can create the home there, then it doesn't have it's like home and at one level of like being comfortable and safe and all of that, and feeling that like a place to return to, or home as the concept of a home country or a home city are kind of two separate things. I've lost that last bit. I don't really have a real home city. I have a number of cities that I'm familiar with and I like, but the place you can call home is more like that space.
Yeah.
or that group of friends you're with, or that person you're with, kind of thing.
Yeah. I'd say that's what I equate home with more, is an experience of being fully at peace with everything that is, wherever it is.
Yeah,
And I think it
that's a
gets
good way to put it.
amplified. It gets amplified through location. I remember like one of the best moments of my life was going back to Japan
Yeah.
and meeting all of my friends that I had there. And that was one of the happiest moments of my life. And the city had totally deteriorated because it was a farming village. And it was really scariest thing you could imagine. A city full of population and activity. And the main street had 75% of the shops shut down. So a place I'd lived,
It's one of those places. Yeah.
only 10 years later, or no, 15, 20 years later, is desolate. It's so scary. I'm walking down the streets and they playing music on the kind of the, what do you call them? The like
I have the speakers in the street
the
there.
speakers
yeah.
on the street with no one on the street and vacant. So I was like, babe, this is
Where
like
was
a
this?
zombie. This is in a place called Shinjo. It's in the Yamagata, very far farming villages. They started importing rice from California, and that basically just killed the city. But it was like a zombie movie. I'm like, babe, I started feeling this anxiety, like we might have to run because it's just is like, this is how it starts, right? Like ominous music, no one on the roads. What's going on here? But the thing was that in the bar with the friends, it was the most magical. It was the most magical, one of those most magical nights of my life, because that was home.
So you did meet your friends in the end?
Yeah, they all came together, and they were all very different. I'm always eclectically bringing people together. So I brought the kind of the city idiot almost, who I loved, who dyes his hair blonde, and no one dyes their hair blonde there, and the woman who owns the nicest store in the city. So these two would never have met or spent any time together if they didn't have me as a mutual friend, which was really sweet, because they, after I'd left, hadn't spent much time or no time together. But now I come back, they came back together, and that was one of the most beautiful nights.
They were all still there.
They were all still there.
Okay.
Yeah, they were all still there. Yeah,
there's a lot of places like that in Japan where people kind of left, and I've started seeing it here a little bit now, because of the economy is of course suffering greatly. Because we have a double whammy. We had a year of protests and the virus, and then we have no more Chinese tourists. And and you start shops shut down. There used to be, I heard a figure that 200,000 people from China arrive every day in Hong Kong.
No.
Yeah, and now it's probably 10 or something. It's like
fascinating.
Yeah.
By the way, we do have some comments coming in. That's always nice to share. You have Paul van der Veer, who probably you worked with at some point. He's saying hello to you.
Lang niet gezien.
Paul. Lang niet gezien. Yeah, look.
All along is speaking to the flu is reduced in all precautions we're taking in life at the moment. He mentioned that a bit earlier.
Yeah.
JC, who's in Kentucky, he's always happy to say hello to us, and he's listening to us.
He has an amazing taste in hats.
He does. He's sending Bambos one, which we haven't gotten yet, JC. Just for the record, I haven't got it. And Bolalang also shares, there's no way that your problem will be mine somewhere down the line. We are one. Humanity is one.
Yeah. That's actually another really good little angle on the whole like collectivism versus individual thinking angle. But anyway,
well, let's stay, because Bolalang, he's in South Africa. He's basically, as far as I'm concerned, he's also a co-host on the show, because he's here every day giving us the questions that guide us and lead us in a lot of ways. And when I look at like my own development of seeing the world, experiencing myself, I went through the years of thinking myself being special, and then living in 7 countries, I've been the minority, and I've seen that each of those countries has shaped the mindset of each country in a very unique way. Like in the Netherlands, it took me a bit longer because I didn't understand Calvinism. Like Calvinism was a hard thing for me to get and understand. And it was like, oh shit, now I understand the Dutch way. But it took me years. And the reason why I'm speaking of how these cultures influence you is because at some point you also come to realize you are in some ways always going to be a byproduct of the environment you're raised in or you move to.
Yeah.
And that, in a way, if you can see and feel that, then it's like, oh shit, then who am I on the biggest scale of just being human and not buying into any one narrative? And that's a hard journey to make, because that can be very isolating, because you're no longer part of the society. You have to allow yourself to be free of it. You have to say, fuck these rules. Like, I don't need to belong by being proper or whatever the things are. And that I find fascinating everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's what Bolalang is speaking to when he says, home in a way is, and Bolalang struggles because he's in a country where there's a lot of religious dogma. And so he's always fighting people, trying to explain to him, if he just believed in Jesus Christ, his life would be that much better.
Yeah.
And since he doesn't believe in Jesus Christ, his life isn't that good. Like, that's the kind of nonsense he's having to deal with on a daily basis, right? Yeah.
Bolalang, please believe in Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Your life will be so much better.
Well, Jesus will save you, Bol.
Just for convenience.
Exactly. Just for convenience. No, but he would argue, and this is what I love about Bolalang, and I've learned a lot from Bolalang on this, and I've had to deal with this in myself, is that, and we had a guest on, which was earlier this week, on truth with Karl Popper. And the whole point is, we can all agree that truth is contextual. Everyone decides their truth, and they establish that by their arguments. But the question is, when is it a moral obligation to do something because another individual's truth is a persecution against someone else?
Yeah.
So one could have lived during Nazi time and said, hey, you know what? It's just a guy with some crazy ideas. And then afterwards, you're like, hey, how would you not have taken arms? And at the same point today, people would say, to what degree are you beholden to going against someone like a Trump? Because if he says, hey, white supremacy, stand by, oh, that's just a joke. That's just a joke.
Well, we can have that discussion again in 5 years and see where it's gone by that time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but that's the question.
Pivotal moment right now. We see it all happen. Yeah, and I think that's the difference during the Nazi time in Germany, you wouldn't get the information straight away. Also, now we get all that information. We can see it happening.
Yeah, but the problem, of course, is that you've already have a predisposition for you've already created your own echo chamber.
Yes,
so whatever echo chamber you're
Facebook
in,
does that for you. Yeah.
Facebook has already given you the gift of never having to listen to anything that doesn't validate what you already want to believe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so in the weird way, there is no more development or intellectual curiosity or expansion, because if you looked at yesterday's debate, I mean, all we learned from that was, like vindictive name calling and no policy discussion. That's basically where we are right now as a nation of what's acceptable. Yeah.
Have you watched The Social Dilemma yet?
I got through half of it, but it felt, honestly, it didn't hit me as many others had, because I felt like it was so obvious already. Like I didn't think, I'm like, guys, what?
Yeah, we know this already. Yeah,
we know this already. I was more.
Yeah, but they put it together in a very, very good way. I think they put a good total picture on it.
Okay. Well, I had a lot of, at least I felt like I had it. So I'm like, okay, so what's new? I think I was more fascinated by the other film that came out, which was about the data analytics, that was out, I think, a year and a half ago. I don't know if you saw that, about
the Great Hack.
The Great Hack.
Yeah.
The Great Hack was far more interesting for me, because it showed how politics could segment populations on such a small, remote level and influence them in ways that corrupted entire countries. That was like, wow, that's where we've gotten. Yeah, that was really, I found that's worth watching. Bambos, probably more so than the shows. Bolalang said, because I always want to give him the last word, because I speak on his behalf, and half the time he says you're not right. So let's just make sure that
moving around releases you from your culture. You remain only with the qualities you like in your original culture.
Oh, isn't
that's
that
an interesting thought? Yeah. You can shed. It's like shedding skin in a way.
That's one thing in the book, The Last Letter. When I wrote that book, what I tried to do was, in the 7 kind of countries that I went through, I wanted to crystallize what were the things I took away from those countries that informed the way I see the world. And in Japan, I'd spent those years, and that was really dedicated to this concept of Ishin Denshin, which is the idea that they have such a high level of empathy, they can read one another's minds. And what I learned in that was that you can really like drop into a level of empathy where words are actually limiting. And I didn't know that until I lived in Japan.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think you could probably relate with that in your Asian experience, no? Or would that be something you'd say you don't have in China?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of my cat's going wild here, moving papers around. Yeah, there's a lot that stays undiscussed in dynamics between people, and that's something I had to get used to, being Dutch and kind of relatively direct. But wait a minute. She's destroying my papers, man.
See, she's like,
Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of.
I want
Yeah.
attention.
I know, yeah.
In a moment, he's gonna
There's a lot of these kind of subtleties that you don't have to say the whole thing, and the
Yeah.
message gets across. But then, of course, you don't know if it completely got across. And sometimes there's as many examples of that not being true as that being true. So it's always confusing. But there's a little bit more of that. There's more subtle ways of hints can get across, and this whole concept of not making the other people lose face. That's a huge thing, and that's part of that. Like you wrap the message in a way that the other person is still that's a form of respect.
We don't think we don't think this job is appropriate for you because all of the factors around it are actually they're problematic. No one would be able to do it, and we're not replacing you. We're just finding somebody that might enjoy this work more than someone with your
already
skill.
pretty harsh, but yeah.
Before we go, because we're over our hour, and we
okay.
haven't actually discussed, and I'd love just to spend a moment on that you are an artist, that you do have showings, and you have exhibitions in Hong Kong. You've even got books that are known. Can you at least put the book up that Bambos stopped me from having you hold up earlier on the show?
This is my. I've done 4 books so far. I'm about to release my 5th, and this has been released 5 years ago in Hong Kong, and it's now in the 5th print.
Wow!
So it's a local bestseller, but it's not like it's gone beyond Hong Kong. But it's done really well, and it's about to be picked up by a British publisher to be published globally, hopefully. And that will come out in another version early next year.
Bravo.
So I've done this thing where I've captured Hong Kong's kind of beautiful, messy stores because they have cats in them, and it's not really about cats, but it's also a bit about cats. But it's more about capturing the culture. Like I start with full views of streets, and there is a cat in there somewhere. But it's mainly a way of capturing the beautiful, rich backgrounds of places, the messiness of the stores, that kind of thing. So it's a lot of these type of photos, and then I have a good friend of mine who did all the nice haikus for it. And so that actually, I see myself more as a photographer designer, and I've published this myself, and I'm about to publish almost like a children's book version of this, which is called Spot the Shop Cat. It's coming out in about 2 months. Nice. So that's my main activity, kind of doing books about the culture in a kind of fairly light-hearted way. I've got other series as well, but that's become my kind of moving from design to photography to publishing, and then creating books and postcards and calendars and things like that.
Yeah, I saw your calendar. I'm a big fan of shooting composition. And so when I look at a picture like you of shooting this sort of landscape view of a shop that has so many details, it almost looks like an impressionist painting in the end. Like that takes me on. I almost feel like it's a magical escape when I look at those pictures, because there's so many details that you can't take them all in. You almost have to absorb the whole thing.
And I try to make sure that I've developed a certain way of shooting these places that it feels like there's still order in them somehow. I mean, I'm very very specific on keeping the lines straight and things like that. So then all of that chaos somehow feels like organized and planned.
Harmony,
and like you said, the compositions, the places just look beautiful. And there's usually that's the beauty here. There's very little evidence in some of these shots that it's 2020 or 2015, 16. There's no branded goods in these places, and that would age something. And the people that work in these places don't have the latest fashion, So these shots look like they could have been taken 50 years ago or something like that. And there's still, I like that. There's still a bit of that left in China and Hong Kong. It's on its way out. That's why I'm documenting it. But in Hong Kong, it's quite slow on its way out. In China, it goes very rapidly.
Yeah.
Actually, my next book, which will be published next year, will be the same concept in mainland China.
Oh, wow.
So I've been going through many different cities in mainland China, photographing cats in stores, and then the larger story of kind of having these old places before they disappear, and they disappear rapidly.
Yeah,
it's quite a tight story in the sense that the only reason the cat is there is that it keeps the mice away.
Yeah,
I mean that's why shop owners, not because they really love cats. I think in the meantime they've grown to love their cats, but they're just practical people. Just like in a lot of Amsterdam houses, there's cats because there's a lot of opportunities for mice and rats. Yeah. And the governments allow people to have the cat in there because it does help. The smell of the cat, I mean, they chase them too, but the smell of the cat is like a repellent for vermin and rodents. And because of that, it's only something you see only in the old stores. So it becomes this metaphor for the old disappearing world. Because in the new stores and gentrified areas of Shanghai or something like that, there's no more cats.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And when you go to China, when I went there, I went there a few times, but the first time the kids would follow me for hours and they'd be touching the hair on my arms because I'm assuming in the meantime, there's not anywhere you're going in China where they're fascinated to see you.
No, I mean, you get a bit of stares, but people touching you. I feel that was never a thing in China. I feel people, in the bigger cities, it's no big deal to have a foreigner. In the smaller cities, people look at me, but they kind of leave me alone. Yeah. They don't. They let me go do my thing. It's not like I think you get that more when you're in India or in Indonesia.
Yeah, well, I'm giving my age. We're talking 1991. I'm backpacking through the villages where people wouldn't have seen a lot.
Just opened up, and
yeah, it was always a little bit. Always the fascination. The what's that guy doing? No, he doesn't belong here thing.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, Bolalong asked for a comment with the name of your book, so please put that in if you can in the comment.
Okay.
You can send it at some point. We've gone over our hour. I just needed to get the cats in because
sure.
I love the cats, and I saw them behind you, and I would have probably spoken an hour about cats if Bambos didn't stop me. So at least I got my 7 minutes in.
I'm gonna just let him
What? I was loving the cats. I told you I wanted to go to the cats earlier on, and you were like, I want to ask more questions about the civil unrest.
Shit.
Thank you.
We need more stories about cats, I think.
So actually, you're blaming me for the show going down, right?
This was a great show.
Just kidding.
Kidding me?
Thank you, Marcel.
Thank you, Marcel. I look forward to seeing you.
It was a lot of fun.
When you do come back to Amsterdam, it'll be great to see you again. Yeah.
Lovely.
Okay. Catch up.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
All right.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
I still think it's Friday for some reason.
I know. It just this does not feel like a Thursday at all. And the fact that it's a 12 o'clock show means, we've got a whole rest of our day, right? Normally we end at 5 and 6. I got to go to dinner and start to get into the next live. Yeah. That was fun.
Yeah.
I did, like I told you before we started, I didn't quite know how this show would go because there wasn't a lot of prep, but I just felt good about my first meeting with Marcel. It was really nice to spend time with him.
He's quite grounded.
Yeah. There were a lot of things he said that actually felt really curious to me. And like you said, grounded. I think when we listen to people, and I do, and I just speak on your behalf, like there's times when I'm listening and hearing that it comes from an experience they were having, or it comes from things they read in the newspaper that morning. And when we speak to Marcel, of course, I'm really feeling like there's this wealth of experience there, which makes it a very, very interesting. Same was true yesterday, right? Yeah. With Bob Deutsch.
Bob Deutsch.
He'll be back on as well. I'm sure he's the master storyteller.
So
tomorrow we've got, I think, Dylan on, right? Dylan.
Oh yeah, the 13-year-old.
We're going to talk to a 13-year-old who's basically done a documentary about plastic in the oceans, and we're going to just discuss with him like what's that all about?
Changing the world at 13.
How does it feel to have people like us screwing up his future ocean?
Yeah.
Because we haven't given it a lot of consideration. That's for damn
Because
sure.
we're privileged.
Because we're privileged. And now he has to pay the price, right? Next generations where we didn't consider our waste and what it was going to mean for everybody else.
And
Very uplifting topic.
And we're going to do that on a Wonderful Chaos.
And we're not going to cuss tomorrow. So we got to get it out of our system now.
Fuck!
See you tomorrow.